Boom! So we have the 3080 on hand here in the studio. We've queued up for hours. We've managed to get our dirty little hands.
I made them by hand.
On a brand new card to be able to share with you some stats. So we've been frantically geeking away, doing loads of tests, loads of benchmarks, particularly for mining, as you're going to be able to see in this video. We have some really interesting results. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. So not only have we got more benchmarks coming, we've got loads more crypto content for everyone to be educated in this space. So if you want to also subscribe down below right now, you'll be able to come back and get some fantastic content as we continue to roll out information as the crypto market grows this year. So for some of you coming back, you may remember our lovely little faces from the first video we did on the benchmarks for the 3080. We've actually already tested the Ethereum mining algorithm. We'll put a link to the description below. You can go and have a look at it for all the stats and statistics that we're able to put on a spreadsheet for you. But ultimately what that meant was we were able to achieve over 100 mega hash per card, which is pretty incredible as far as the mining stats go. Now that was at the expense of a pretty high power draw of around 200 watts TDP. So quite a big number to be playing with. And ultimately, that's kind of what plays off against each other. So moving forward, the results that we have today add in a totally different element to the argument that we've already got, because we're going to explain to you the differences in how a graphics card works, which will give you a bit more understanding as to why this card and the title of this video dictates that maybe, just maybe, the 3080 is not going to be as great a mining card as some may think. The results are really interesting. So before we jump into the numbers and show you exactly what we've been working on, let's talk about the 3080 generally now a couple of days after the original release. Where do we find ourselves? So obviously, in order for us just to get one measly card to test, we have to scour the country. We have to queue up for many an hour to be able to get just one of these cards to be able to run some tests. Now, a few days later, where we are at the moment, as you'll be able to see from the footage on screen right now, you can go and pick one of these up from someone that's got one in hand on eBay, and you're looking at anything from £1,500 all the way up to people that probably have fake bids, but nonetheless, £20,000 or £30,000 for those people that are saying they've got a card and the people that will happily pay a premium to get a card right now today. The pre-orders may be open for some suppliers, but what that's leaving is a massive price increase from the people that were originally able to pick up the card at supposedly more retail prices, and that is most likely set to continue as the demand for these cards, particularly from great gamers at this point in time, is very high indeed. So I would not be surprised if the amount of cards available between now and Christmas is extremely slim, with the prices continuously increasing as Nvidia gets the most money they can for those early adopters that really want to get their hands on this kit quick. So obviously, doing what we do here at Easy Crypto, we're one of the UK's largest providers for mining equipment. So yes, we get through a chunk of graphics cards. So you know, we have many connections with both national, international suppliers of cards. So generally speaking, you know, we get a pretty good idea of what's floating around, both in Europe and other places as well. And I do not have anything special to tell you. We have never ever seen Nvidia keep so tight-lipped on stock levels, distribution, where the cards are, when they're coming out. It really is a case of a container may turn up at a big supplier tomorrow. They actually just do not know. It's a really interesting time right now. Only Nvidia seem to have the keys to whatever release schedule they have in mind for this, and it's sure going to be very interesting to see how this plays out over the next few months. So let's talk about the card itself for a quick moment. Obviously, many of you are going to be aware of the actual numbers and the stats. It's based upon the Ampere architecture for the new 30 series. We've now got 10 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory, increasing bandwidth and speed from the previous generation. And ultimately, these two elements of having a faster processor and more memory, of course, make it a much better card for gaming. We've seen some really interesting results there compared to even the 2080 Ti of the last series. But when it comes to mining, it's not quite as cut and dry as people think, which is why these results are so interesting. So in order to give you a good reference as to why it's not quite as simple as, well, this card's more powerful, so it's better, we need to understand the three core elements of a graphics card, which will help give you the numbers which we're about to show you a little bit more nuance and understanding. So in order for a graphics card to be good when it comes to mining, there are three main elements. One is how much power does the card use? So how many watts of electrical energy are going into the card? It's fine to be able to put more in if that means we're going to get the same amount of hash power out of it, but is there a point where more power doesn't equal more hash? That's obviously something to be concerned with. The second element and the third element are the two hardware components that go into a graphics card. So a graphics card is made up of a core, basically a mini CPU, and memory. So similar to the computer that you may well be watching this on now, ultimately a CPU and memory work in a very similar way. The CPU, the core, does all the calculations, and the memory kind of holds that information for a certain period of time. So the faster the processor, the more numbers that can be crunched, and the bigger the memory, the more things that the graphics card can remember in its head for a short period of time, enabling different applications to happen. So with these two elements and the power, all three of them work in a way where as miners or as gamers, you can overclock or undervolt, you can move these numbers up or down, higher or lower, artificially to be able to create optimums that increase performance in certain ways. Now, if you're a gamer, you probably just want to slam everything on maximum power, maximum overclock, maximum speed to get the ultimate frame rates, which is fine because you're not too bothered about electrical consumption whilst you're playing games. Now, for miners, of course, the amount of power that's being consumed is a much more interesting number because we want to be able to earn as many coins as we can and as much money as we can for the lowest possible costs on a commercial scale. So this is where some of the numbers that we have to show you today that pertain more to the core side of things are very, very interesting, particularly when you balance those with the previous test results from our Ethereum mining, because Ethereum mining is a much more memory heavy algorithm, whereas MTP is a much more core heavy algorithm. So we've been able to test both sides of these cards somewhat independently. There are mining algorithms out there like KawPoW or Progressive Proof of Work, which test both sides of those graphics card elements very, very strongly. So we don't have access to those numbers yet because those miners are not compatible. But what's really interesting is by being able to test the memory and the core somewhat independently, because those algorithms work in that way, it gives us a much better understanding of what average performance we can expect across the algorithms and across the mining market for this card moving forward. So without further ado, let's get straight into the results so you can have a look at exactly what we've found. It's quite straightforward, and I know there's lots of numbers here for you to wrap your head around. So this green line here is the baseline. So we've taken a 3080 out of the box. We haven't done any tweaking, it's just on 100% power. And as you can see from the box, that's doing around 300 watts on the card. So it's a very, very energy intense card. Now, what that's given us is 6.275 hash on MTP mining Zcoin, which is a pretty big number, which is damn impressive. However, the figure that we really want to compare here is this box here. This is one of the most important box because it's hash per watt, which ultimately is efficiency of the graphics card. So out of the box, we've got a 2092 efficiency. Now, all of the other tests that you can see here as we've come down, all of these are from altering the overclock to some capacity. So this first chunk here is when we've got 100% power. We've made some changes here to core and the memory. And then down here, we've played with the power 80%, 70%, 60%. And as you can see, it's just crashing, crashing, crashing at the bottom. This is a card that does not like to reduce its power. So even by the time we're getting down to 200 watts, 215 watts, we're just having real problems. And even if we undervolt the cards to 270, 230 here in the different power bands, we're just seeing a huge drop off in performance, which doesn't make efficient sense. So the most efficient that we're able to get this card here is this nice purple line that you can see, where we've got 120 on the core, we've got 200 on the memory, 100% power, and that's increased our average to 2177, which is quite nice to be able to see there. So you can see that number there, 2177. So a fractional increase in overall performance from baseline, still running at 300 watts, which gives us a 6.532 average. So those of you that have seen these numbers You're probably thinking, okay, great, those numbers are really interesting, Josh, but compared to what? How does this kind of sit with the things? Why is the title of this video a little bit when it comes to crypto mining? Well, let's give some reference point for this to help you understand why this is a little bit more interesting than you think. So if we flip back to the numbers here, above this, we've actually pulled up numbers from our current iteration of equipment, some of the stuff you can see behind us, the 2080 Supers. Now, again, these graphics cards are fantastic graphics cards in themselves. They're the most powerful available at the moment, before, of course, the 3080s. And this was kind of the bread and butter of what we're used to. Now, here you can see, again, the same numbers when we come across. These are the most efficient that we've been able to get here. So with 10 on the core and just 150 watts on the power, we're able to get 0.2207 efficiency running the card at 150, 155 watts, which gives us 3.4 hashes on MTP. Now, this is really interesting because effectively what the numbers dictate is that the old card, the 2080 Super, as it stands right now today, is actually better than the 3080. What on earth in overall efficiency in watt per hash? Now, let me make it clear, they are numbers I was not expecting to see. This is a little bit of not a concern because it's a bit more complicated than that, but certainly not numbers that I expected in its raw form. So ultimately, all of this comes down to the new card being such a monster on power that it's running at 300 watts. So it's effectively double the power, although, of course, you're going from 3.4 hash to 6.2 hash. So you're almost doubling the hash rate for a pretty much 50-50 gain. So it's a very, very interesting thing. We would have expected to have seen some type of performance increase in isolation, such as we did on Ethereum. We did see a big efficiency increase on Ethereum compared to previous generations of card. But here, due to the extra power that's required, it's not quite as cut and dry as you think. So what I would have really have liked to have seen from these results is some type of efficiency gain overall. No one's really going to be too much upset if the card uses more power, providing that there's a little bit of an average uplift in gain in some respect. Typically over the past generations of card, from the 10 series to the 20 series, pretty much across the board, it was very easy to achieve a 10, 15, 20% performance gain as the technology moved forward. This is the first time I've ever seen in the many years we've been doing this, a gain in isolation at least, which is not as strong as what we would have expected. However, as we're going to get into, there are two reasons why this might not be as cut and dry as that and could still change as things move forward. So the first point to mention here, which may completely change the numbers that we've presented to you, is it's absolutely early days. I expect this to be the first video on the internet that gives these numbers, and obviously what that means is the miner in which we've used to do these tests is the first miner that can even accept these new cards. So historically, what we know from doing what we do quite well is that over time, the miners, the software that you use to mine on, will continue to increase, continue to optimize, and it's very likely as the months roll by that the miners will become vastly more efficient, and we're going to be able to see some type of percentage gain over time. Now, that doesn't neglect the fact that there probably should have been a bigger difference to begin with, but it does also mean that there may be other things that will come as time goes by, which could make a bigger difference than we could ever realize. If we flip back to a few years ago when the 1080 Ti was the king of the hill when it came to mining, it wasn't very good for Ethereum compared to other cards such as the RX 470, 480. But then, of course, the ETH enlargement pill came out, which gave a huge boost by tweaking some memory times. So as of yet, of course, it's ridiculously way too early to be talking about anything of that nature yet, as the card's only a few days old. But there may be some type of modifications that we can do to the cards moving forward, which would really help. There may be some software increases on the miner side. So it's not quite as cut and dry as this isn't ever going to be any better, but it certainly would have been interesting to have seen some better results in isolation. Now, the second point to mention here is that, of course, from our other test, the Ethereum video, which again we can link above for you to have a look at is the Ethereum algorithm isn't really bothered about the core of the graphics card the same as it is the memory of the graphics card. And what we've seen in the 3080s is that the memory is fantastic. We did see some very large gains mining Ethereum between 2080 and the 3080 series. We had some really, really nice numbers. So what that means is that the memory, proportionally in the 30 series of cards, is vastly stronger than the previous generation of cards. So even though in this iteration, the MTP algorithm is just focusing on core, we've not seen a big gain. You have to remember the graphics card is made up of both of these elements. So overall, it's certainly going to have a nice kick. So these algorithms work in isolation. There are lots of mining algorithms out there, such as progressive proof of work. Kapow would be a great example of that for mining Ravencoin at the moment, where it takes both of those elements and uses them and stretches them to the limit. So it's going to be really interesting when those results are able to get out and we're able to disseminate that information to you, where overall we'll be able to see a really good difference in performance when the card is being stretched in both ways. So at this point in time, we can only kind of guess as to how much better that's going to be. If we would have seen a large increase in CPU power here or core power, and we've already seen a very large increase on the Ethereum algorithm for memory, we could have been exceptionally excited about a win and a win moving things forward. However, as things stand, we've not seen such a great movement in core, but we've seen a great movement in memory, which is certainly going to mean on average this is going to push forward to be a really good card moving forward, but probably nowhere near as good as else we may have expected if we just would have looked at the Ethereum numbers without looking at the new algorithm results we provided today. So just a quick note on the ever-going battle of gamers versus miners, because I appreciate there might be plenty of gamers watching this who probably want to punch me in the face because we're using all your graphics cards to mine on. Let me just give you a heads up on that and address that directly. That is categorically not the case, especially when it comes to the 3080 cards. There is nobody, and I mean nobody, that is using these to mine on right now. As one of the largest companies that do what we do, we literally have one in our test unit here, and there are no more to go around. All the demand at the moment is explicitly from gamers, notwithstanding the fact that even if any other mining companies got them without us realizing, which is pretty much impossible to happen, there are simply no mining algorithms yet other than the Ethereum algorithm and MTP that you can even use these cards on. So it will take quite a long period of time for the field to be able to be played on, as it were, in terms of the new graphics cards. And ultimately, until all of the results are in, there's not going to be a lot of people that are making commercial decisions in this direction, at large scales at least, as to if this is the best way to go or not yet. So ultimately, it's not quite as cut and dry as we're taking up all your cards and you're going to hate us. I think this one's going to be much more balanced, and overall, the 3080, generally speaking at this point, is looking like an exceptional card for gaming performance. But as of this point, my final conclusions from what we've seen so far is the jury is still out there as to how much better this is going to be for mining in regards for moving forward. So personal conclusions, to sum all this up, what have we really found here? Well, on one hand, I'm quite disappointed that the results in isolation aren't quite as strong as what we thought we were going to have, especially compared to Ethereum, so it does kind of balance out from those pretty incredible results that we saw there. So again, I'm not too worried about it moving forward, because I'm also very realistic about the algorithm changes that will come over time, the optimizations that will come over time. There may even be some, ETH pill equivalent hardware possible modification or a big software change which can change things moving forward. But of course, the miners is really the big one. This is just the first iteration of the miners. The percentage increase in performance we expect to be quite large at the front. So all things considered, the verdict is still very much out there, especially when it comes to the other mining algorithms such as Kapow, which really stretch the card on both sides, which is probably the one I'm most excited to see, because that will give us the most honest answer as to, on average, how much better this card is for mining. But right now, the honest truth is that dependent upon prices, dependent upon supply, dependent upon all these other factors, it may just be that the 3080 is not quite the weapon that we thought it may have been for mining the verdict is still out there. So then, guys, what does that make you feel? What are your thoughts on seeing this evidence? Hopefully the first people to be able to bring you this. So gamers, how is this making you feel? Miners, how is this making you feel? Is it making you want to go and run out and buy a card more? Is it going to make you want to hold off? How are these numbers making you feel? What are your thoughts and feelings? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to sit around as this video goes up and we can discuss that with you in more detail. So until then, guys, if you want to give us a like and a subscribe below, we've got much more content coming on this card, much more information about the crypto space in general, and we'd love to see you again in the next video.